Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com with another video on React. And in this video we're going to talk about the useRef hook and the useReducer hook and how those can be useful to you. So first we'll talk about useRef. What useRef does, it allows us to kind of access the things we would access. Like usually you would use like plain vanilla DOM manipulation or jQuery, and you can grab like different HTML elements and grab their properties and their values and all this stuff. Okay, in React, it's kind of tricky because of the way React set up. But if you really need to grab those properties, what you can do is you can create a ref or a reference to that element. So let's just do a quick and dirty example. I will use this stuff component that we've been building on, and I'm just going to create a ref. So we'll just say const my ref equals react dot use ref, and then we just pass in null. Okay, because initially it's referring to nothing. I'm gonna go to my JSX and I'm going to say let's do a ref on this UL. So ref, and then we're gonna just do my ref as what we're referring to. Okay, and what I will do is I want to console log my ref. So I'm gonna add another console log here. I'll just say console.log my ref. And we will say my ref is what is being console logged, so we can see what's in this, what that generates for us. Okay, so let me open with live server. Okay, there's all that stuff. Let's go to the console. Here's my ref. So you get this object back. So you see, you get the current object that this is referring to, which is the UL, and inside of it you have all the properties you would normally have in the element. So you can access its child nodes, its children. This has been particularly useful to me when it comes to using third-party components. In the sense that sometimes there's things that I need to dive into the component, but I can't because I don't have access to the code. I'm pulling in a third-party library and I don't want to edit their source code. So what I'll do is maybe I'll slap a ref on the component and then use that to dig into the children. Okay, and then I can use that to I had to do that once with Stripe in order to do something with one of the functions that were buried in the component that I needed to change how it worked. But the point is, you can use this as sort of as an entryway to kind of access its children, to access its name and value properties for forms, its ID, all the stuff you would normally use when you use something like query selector or jQuery or whatnot. Okay, it just allows you to grab that element and have all of its properties available to you. You would just do, my ref.current in this case, and then all the properties are there. So if I wanted to grab, like, let's say this was a form field, it would be like my ref.current value per se. I've also used it to grab form fields once in a while. I know that's not necessarily best practice, but I find it to be kind of convenient, easy way to do it versus doing all this handle change and handle submit and all that stuff. So that's all that does. Then there's useReducer. Okay, what useReducer does, it creates another piece of state. So let's try that. Const. So it works just like this. So the piece of state we'll just say is num. But instead of having a set where you directly set the variable, you're going to get a function called dispatch. And the idea is that you kind of already know how you're going to change the value, but you're going to change the value based on certain things that happen. So let's say we do this, okay, and then what we do is we pass in react.useReducer, and in here we have to pass in the reducer, which is a function. Okay, so we have to enter in a function. And then the function is going to take in, pretty sure it's the payload. Let me just do a quick. It takes the existing state first. So it'd be num, our existing num, okay? And then it would take our action, which will just be an object that we can use to kind of determine what the action is. Or it doesn't even have to be an object. It could be a string. Okay, I'll show you that way first. Okay, num action. And then basically it does things. And then whatever value it returns, that's the new state. But I gotta also pass in as a second argument after that function the initial state, which we'll say is 0. So num starts at 0. Okay, and what I'm gonna do, just to kind of show you how this would work, you can create, so usually what people do is we'll do a switch. So we'll do a switch based on the action. So based on what action gets passed in on dispatch, we'll determine whether we're gonna add or subtract 1 from num. Okay, so first we'll say case add. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll just do return num plus 1, and that'll become the new num. Then break. Okay, and then if they say case sub, okay, then we will return num minus 1, and we'll break. And default, if it's nothing, if it doesn't match any of the cases, just as a fallback, we'll return num. Num will be unchanged. And there's our function. So see, the difference is I'm not specifying the new state using setState. I'm returning it based sort of on an operation based on this switch. So now what I can do is, let's go find where my JSX is in this component, all the way down here. Okay, above the UL. Actually, I'm going to get rid of that UL blog post. We're not really worrying about that right now. I want to put an H1, and the H1 is going to have num. So we'll see what num is. Okay, and then we're going to create 2 buttons. Okay, first button is going to say add, and it's going to have a function. So we're going to say on click equals, and what you can do is you can actually pass in an arrow function, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to pass in an arrow function, and that function is going to run the dispatch function. So dispatch, because again, when we created the the reducer, see here we are getting back the num state variable, and we're getting back dispatch. And then when we use dispatch here, where did my JSX go? Here. So I'm going to say I want to use dispatch, and dispatch is going to take in the action. That's all it takes. So I'm going to take in, pass in, we'll say add. Okay. So dispatch takes in the action. Then what it does is that is going to kick in this reducer function, which takes in the current num and the action, and then runs this function, and the return value of that becomes the new num. That's how reducer works. This is essentially the same way Redux works. Essentially, the useReducer hook is Redux built into React, except you don't have to do all that boilerplate. Okay, and it's not necessarily global unless you use context, and I'm not going to get into all that right now. Okay, so that is that. That I think does what I wanted to do. Then we want to create another button for subtract. So the same thing, except we'll change the dispatch. We'll change the action to sub because that's what my switch says. So subtract, and then yeah. So now let's run this. Actually, it's already running in the browser, so let's go take a look at it. And we see here add, even though I wrote subtract wrong, but let's see here. If I hit add, see it adds 1 because it's running the reducer. It takes a look at that action, add, matches it up against a switch, and does that. So I can hit add, subtract. So instead of having to create like a bunch of different functions, I'm creating one function, and then what that function does is just based on my action. And what some people will do is that they'll, instead of just having dispatch as just a string, you can create a whole object. So you can say, just say action is add, but then you might have another detail here, like the nums, or we'll just say by, which we'll say is 2. Okay, and then, you know, I'll just copy the same object over here. So then that way, technically, the action is this object that we can use to manipulate things. So action sub, and then we'll say by 2. So now it'll subtract or add, and then I'm going to modify this, where basically now it's testing against action.action, because action is now that object. And instead of adding by 1, it's going to do it by whatever action dot by is. So it's going to action dot by. So then I can change it and see I can make this much more malleable where different buttons will, I can mix and match different things to create sort of a grid of possible things that happen and really reduce like how many different functions that I need to make. Because I can create a different button that passes in a different action, a different action.action, and a different by to create a possibility for a button that adds 1, that adds 2, that adds 3, that adds 4, that adds 5, infinitely without really having to create another function. I'm just creating another button that just passes in different information to dispatch. So let's see here. Let's go try that out. So now I should be adding 2 and subtracting 2. Okay, so the useReducer hook can really help create some powerful logic in the way you manage your state. Especially useful for like things that, let's say you're making a game. Let's say you are making a game. There's people who've actually made full-on RPGs with React, and you're trying to keep track of like moving left, right. You know, that would be essentially your switch, left, right. You know, what button key do they use, and then you're adjusting their position based on that. And then that way your logic gets pretty straightforward in executing. So that's how the useReducer hook works. The useReducer hook oftentimes can be combined with context, where you create one reducer, sort of like at say the app level, and then you pass in the state that, and you pass in that state. So in this case, num and dispatch, and the dispatch function, and I'm passing that into context, and then other parts of my application can then pull that in there using useContext to use the dispatch function to use that num variable. And you know, because I might make that, I could make, it doesn't have to be just a number, it could be a whole object with lots of details, and then I'm using dispatch as a way to kind of manipulate sort of a global state. So you can essentially mock Redux without having to install the whole Redux library if you want. Redux has a lot of other tools with it, which is another reason why you might still want to use Redux, but you don't have to. A lot of the sort of the key tools have now since been sort of built into React, these hooks. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. This is another tutorial on React. Have a great day and enjoy.